Hello, once more everyone, welcome back to the channel. Back here on YouTube doing week number 2 of my 2023 Big Ten football predictions. After a great week 1 where I went 10-1 with getting one wrong, surprising to 11 games there were. Going into week 2, we have 14 Big Ten games this week in the Big Ten, all 14 teams in action, all against non-conference. Multiple Power 5 non-conference games for the Big Ten this week, which means there might be some surprising some surprising picks this week regarding the Big Ten. Plus, my goal is to get at least 8 to 10 correct picks out of the 14 games there are for this week to keep the record above 500, which you're currently at 10-1, only 9 over at the moment. So we're going to try to continue that and get 8 to 10 picks correct. With that being started, we have 2 games on Friday night. So with that, let's get into it right away for the Big Ten football predictions for week number 2. Let's go, everyone. As we go into it, the first game for Big Ten this week, of course, we start over in the Big Ten at 6 o'clock tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern. No, 6 p.m. Central Time with the Indiana Hoosiers taking on in-state rival Indiana State Sycamores tomorrow night in Bloomington. This one's going to be one of those interesting matchups. Indiana coming off a loss where they lost 23-3 to Ohio State. Indiana did keep the first quarter against Ohio State close last week. It was only down 10-3. It was only down 7-3 or 10-3 at the end of the first quarter last week. But they ended up only getting 3 points the rest of the game. Ohio State ended up scoring the rest of the points after that first quarter and ran away with it, which I was right about picking Ohio State for the win. Indiana, though, this week, I think they'll get back on track, get some more points this week against Indiana State, in-state rival. These two teams don't match up a lot, but when they do, Indiana, I think, has controlled this matchup in the past when they play Indiana State. And then I'll be taking Indiana because of it, because Indiana playing at home on a Friday night against in-state rival. I'm taking the Hoosiers for a win on Friday night. Moving on to our next Big Ten game on Friday night. Big Ten, Big 12, the first of 2 Big Ten, Big 12. Illinois going to Lawrence, Kansas against the Kansas Jayhawks. Big Ten, Big 12 matchup here to look at. Overall, this matchup is going to be one of those matchups where you're going to want to win a game. Of course, want to win this matchup if you are one of these teams. And as you look at it, Illinois coming off a close win like last week. I said Illinois going against Toledo was going to be a close matchup because MAC teams, when they go into Champaign, always keep games close. Illinois won by 30-28. This week going to Kansas. Kansas, I saw a few days ago, is 5th in the Big 12 Power 5 rankings going into it. And I'm going to pick Kansas, the home team, at home against Illinois. I'm giving Illinois a loss this week, taking the Jayhawks for Friday night's matchup in the Big Ten, in the first Big Ten, Big 12 slate. Go with the Jayhawks on Friday night. Moving on from there, as we move on from Champaign to our next Big Ten non-conference game, Delaware going in to Penn State. As if you noticed, I don't have any other road teams' helmets that are non-Power 5, but I do have some. Penn State going up against Delaware, and after winning against West Virginia, a Big 12 team that was a rival of them, theirs in the past, Penn State got a big win last week. Penn State looking to go at it again this week after winning 38-15 against West Virginia. I think Penn State's going to get a pretty good win this week, where I think they score more than 38 points. I think they keep Delaware off the scoreboard most of the night here. So taking Penn State in the nightcap in this matchup for the weekend coming up. I'm taking Penn State, which moves on to our biggest game of the weekend. Biggest non-conference game by far for the Big Ten. Nebraska, after starting 0-1 with a 3-point loss at Minnesota, goes into Colorado in a morning matchup. Surprisingly, this game's at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, so early morning matchup, just an hour behind Central Time Zone, which will be 11 a.m. as you look into this matchup on Saturday afternoon. Colorado, with a surprising upset, moved into the top 25 after beating TCU by 45-42. Going up against Nebraska. Nebraska comes in 0-1. And you look at this, I just look at this matchup thinking, Nebraska, what could go wrong? Starting 0-1 on the road for a second game in a row. You start 2 games on the road in a row for Nebraska before you head home next week. I'll tell you right now, I'm going to take Colorado to continue their surprising start under Deion Sanders as their new head coach. Even though I don't like Deion Sanders as a coach, I'm going to take Colorado to get the win here on Saturday morning against Nebraska. Which moves us on to our next matchup. The Purdue Boilermakers taking a road trip after starting 0-1 to ACC country against Virginia Tech. Here's the deal. I don't know much about Virginia Tech currently at all. So there, I will say that about this matchup. I'll tell you right now, I'll pull it up real quick, tell you about Virginia Tech real quick. Purdue, after losing by 4 to Fresno State, 39-35, has Virginia Tech on the road. This might be one of those matchups where Virginia Tech is going to have to get a win. Or Purdue, they need a win to start if they need to get a win if they want to avoid going 0-2. As I look at the schedule, Virginia Tech last week beat Old Dominion 36-17, 36-17. And going up against Purdue this week, this is the first of 2 Big Ten teams Virginia Tech will play, because after this week, Virginia Tech will go to Rutgers next week. I'm going to take Virginia Tech. I'm going to take Virginia Tech to get a win this week. Purdue, they lost by 4, didn't play defense last week. I think Purdue's going to have some issues with the offense still if they can't score. I think with the points Virginia Tech scored last week, which they scored 36, I think Virginia Tech continues the winning ways and gets another win in this matchup. So far, taking home teams, heavy on the home teams this week so far. As we're moving on to our next big non-conference Big Ten game. Youngstown State coming in to Columbus, Ohio, take on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Last week after Ohio State started 1-0 on the road, which I picked Ohio State correctly to win at Indiana. Ohio State's going to do it again this week. Youngstown State against Ohio State. This matchup's going to be one of those matchups this week in the Big Ten, which will be interesting to see. I don't expect Youngstown State to get a lot into it, but I do expect Ohio State to score more than just 23 this week. I expect Ohio State to blow Youngstown State out and get like 60, maybe 70 with the type of players they have. After last week seeing 3 Power 5 teams blow teams out with 70 or more points, Oregon being the team that had 81. 2 other teams had 73. I think Ohio State can match that this week with playing Youngstown State, and I think they get a win on Saturday afternoon. After that, move on to our next Big Ten, Big 12 matchup. Another Big 10, Big 12 rivalry. Iowa State Cyclones hosting the Iowa Hawkeyes. As an Iowa fan, I'll just say this. After being at the game last year where Iowa State won 10-7, and Iowa's only touchdown was a rushing touchdown in the game, this time Iowa goes to Ames, Iowa, against Iowa State. A place where Iowa State has not beaten the Hawkeyes at home since 2011. When the game in 2011 went to triple overtime. Iowa has won every game since 2013. Since 2013. And with Iowa winning those games since 2013, some crazier games have happened since then, including a few overtime games, plus a few blowouts in the matchup. And I look it up with Iowa, new quarterback Caden McNamara. Can he lead the team after a good win last week, 24-14? They didn't exactly get 25, but Iowa State, this matchup's going to be pretty good on paper. And I'm going to take the road team, the Hawkeyes, this time to get a win because even though Iowa State hasn't won a home game against Iowa since 2011, this has become one-sided for the road team in the matchup. Last year, Iowa State won in Iowa, but they It was their first win since 2012. First win since like 2012 in the rivalry game, or 2014, I think it was. Was the last time Iowa State won a game in Iowa City. They won last year. So looking at this matchup, I like Iowa to get the win. No, they'll get the win, I think. They did drop out of the top 25, though. But I do think Iowa won't get the win on the road. The only road team so far I'm taking with the Big Ten predictions this week so far. Moving on. Michigan State against Richmond. As we get the Michigan State helmet out. There we go, Spartans. The Richmond Spiders, non-conference FCS team again. Against Michigan State. Michigan State last week scored 31 over Central Michigan, gave up only 7. And one of those games again, one of these matchups again, I think where a Big Ten team will score 35 or more, or maybe 40 or more. I do expect Michigan State to do that this week. And they will get it done easily, I'm sure. And that's why I'm taking Michigan State, surprisingly, to get the win against the Richmond Spiders going in on Saturday afternoon. Moving on to our next matchup in the Big House. The Michigan Wolverines taking on UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Last week after Michigan got a big win. Yeah, last week for Michigan after a big win against East Carolina, 30-3. This will be another one of those matchups which should turn out pretty good, I think. On the side of Michigan, should favor Michigan at home. A big house. Should be a cakewalk in the park after scoring 30 points last week. Should score about 30 or more this week as well. And that's why I'm taking the Wolverines of Michigan in week number 2 coming up in this matchup. Moving on to our next non-conference game. Northwestern Wildcats, after starting 0-1 with a loss against Rutgers, 24-7, against the University of Texas El Paso. So Northwestern comes in at 1-1. University of Texas El Paso, don't know much about them. I'll tell you real quick if I can find their record overall. Yeah, so Northwestern, after losing 24-7 last week, brings in a UTEP football team, University of Texas El Paso, into this matchup. So take on Northwestern. Yeah, Northwestern, after losing last week, this is one of those teams for Northwestern. They might only win one game this year. Just saying. And they probably will win one game this year. And if Northwestern is going to win one game this year, this might be the game, I think, that will be a win. Just saying. This will be one of those games that's going to be a win. Last week, UTEP won, but Northwestern this week, I think, will win at home, get a win against a non-conference team finally, and continue their season. But will be the last time we talk about Northwestern going. Don't possibly, maybe not. We'll look about it later on in the season. So Northwestern getting the win there. Moving on, Maryland next. The Terps of Maryland go up against Charlotte, the University of Charlotte. Now this matchup is going to be one of those other matchups where Maryland's going to score a lot of points, just like they did last week. Surprisingly, I think Maryland does damage again against another non-conference team, just like they did last week. They outscored Towson 38-6 last week. They're going to do it again this week against Charlotte, I believe, and that's why I'm taking the Maryland Terps to get a win. Because Tagovailoa, their quarterback, he will score points. Help you score a lot of points. Taking Maryland there. Moving on from that one. Eastern Michigan this time around going to Minnesota. And as we talk about Eastern Michigan going into a game, Eastern Michigan against Minnesota last week. Minnesota started with a 13-10 win against Nebraska. Had to kick a field goal to win it this week against Eastern Michigan. I think Minnesota's going to have a much easier chance of winning, and they should be able to win, surprisingly. Should be able to win, and I think Minnesota will pick up a key win. I think they'll score maybe 20 to 30 points in this matchup against Eastern Michigan coming up on Saturday evening. So going with Minnesota there in the nightcap. First of 3 night games on the night. First of 4 night games on the night. Maryland plays a night game against Charlotte. Went on from there, going with Temple against Rutgers. A former Big East matchup. Former rivals from the Big East hook up with each other this weekend as they play in Rutgers, the birthplace of college football. Okay, if you say it's the birthplace of college football. I think this is going to be one of those games where Rutgers and Temple will square out. And I think it's going to be close, this matchup. I think Rutgers might have a good chance to get a win. Do they get a win in this matchup? Unknown. Temple, I don't know much about their team, but I believe they might have a chance for an upset. But I like Rutgers in the matchup, surprisingly, this weekend. I'm going to take the Scarlet Knights and win number 2, which moves us on to our last Big Ten game of the night. The Wisconsin Badgers, another Power 5 matchup, going into Washington State, Pullman, Washington. The Washington State Cougars, and a night game under the lights. The last game of the week on Saturday night over on ABC, Washington State and Wisconsin. This matchup's Wisconsin after starting 1-0 last week with a win against who they beat. They beat Buffalo 38-17. This is going to be a tough test for Wisconsin going into this weekend, surprisingly. And it's also going to be a challenge. It's also going to be experience with the Big Ten expansion coming next year by adding UC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon. By adding 4 new Big Ten teams on the West Coast, Wisconsin's going to get the first experience of many this year in the Big Ten to travel out west, to learn a bit about how to travel to a West Coast team and play a team, because with 4 new teams from the West Coast coming in, Wisconsin's going to have to learn. And I'll tell you this, Big Ten teams don't fare well when they have to travel out west against Pac-12 and play on the road. And I think Wisconsin get some very good experience with that this weekend. I'm taking the Badgers to get a win on the road at Washington State in an early test against a Pac-12 opponent. So give me the Badgers there for week 2 with a win. As you heard it here first, as we go back through the predictions for week 2 with a quick recap. Taking Indiana over Indiana State, taking Kansas over Illinois, the first Big Ten, Big 12 matchup of the night on Friday. Then Saturday, moving on, taking Penn State over Delaware, taking Colorado to upset and beat up on Nebraska, taking Virginia Tech at home against Purdue, Ohio State, taking them over Youngstown St, an easy matchup. After that, I'm going to the Hawkeyes of Iowa, going into Ames, Iowa, to win their, again, names. Iowa State's home losing streak against the Hawkeyes will continue. Taking Michigan State against Richmond, taking Michigan against UNLV, taking Northwestern against University of Texas, El Paso. After that, the night games, taking Maryland against Charlotte, taking Minnesota against Eastern Michigan, taking Rutgers over Temple in a close matchup, and then Saturday night, taking the Badgers of Wisconsin over to Washington State Cougars on the road. Taking 2 road teams this week, everyone. If you liked today's Big Ten video, football prediction video, please remember to watch, like, subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends to do the same if they have not done so yet already. Also, don't forget to hit that notification button below so you know when I upload a new video. And with that being said, have a nice night, stay safe, and peace out. And I'll see you right back here next Thursday with our Week 3 Big Ten prediction video next Thursday. See you next week, everyone. Bye for now and stay safe.